doctor.
Okay. So
Julia
Tim,
stumbled into deep politics
yeah,
tonight.
Tim, as an advocate for equality, because I believe you were implying that you were an advocate for equality.
Yeah, yeah.
I have one simple question: should women sign up for the Selective Service?
I think everyone should be treated equally. So
Okay, so
yes.
should we be drafting women?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, should we be drafting anybody,
Now,
right?
Yeah,
do you
that would be
think
the
that
question.
now, Tim, if
There's a
we
lot of
put
different
that up
jobs.
for a Democratic vote, if we put that up for a Democratic vote, do you think that would pass?
Well, let's think about it differently. In World War II, you had service women on, and you know it because you worked in the military. There, maybe if you're in the Navy or something like that, there's a lot of different jobs involved with keeping that corporation, that company going. Being on the boat, working on the boat, being a secretary, things like that. The idea of having people all be infantry isn't the question. The question is whether or not conscripted service for the state by citizens of either gender could be done. I think that's a more broad question.
Want to be
No, I gotta pause.
that at
Regardless
all.
of whether you like conscription or not, it is the law of the land.
Yeah.
Currently, the law of the land in America is that it is possible at any time for the president to sign one piece of paper and conscription begins. It is the law of the land, and currently it is an equitable law, not an equal law. Should we change it and rip mothers away from their newborn children, sending them off to war?
I
think Israel.
Some
I think
women
Israel has
have
mandatory
penises.
service. Some European countries too, right? I think Switzerland, maybe.
Yeah, and
And
I
that's
think
that. So
you have to also and there's precedent for certain
stupid.
times and things change in certain times, right? So we could imagine.
but
being
but
a
again
use for it during,
I look at things so again, Dr. Martin Luther King, I absolutely love his words. John F. Kennedy, the final analysis speech, I also love the final analysis, right? We all have the same goals. He said we all breathe the same air, we all value our children's future, and we're all mortal, and those are things that unite all of us.
I would just like to point out that in the chat currently, all of the women are saying "fuck no."
They don't want to be drafted.
Well, you gotta.
I don't want to be drafted either, though.
All I know, you look at Israel.
more.
To be fair, you look at Israel and you see the epigenetics of militarism. People that have become stronger, healthier generation by generation. Social habits that have been inferred not from the plagues or from times in the ghettos where they were traumatized, but in kibbutzes where they learned how to have these new social interactive systems. So I think that we have to look at it also from that light, that you could evolve from that system to something where people are benefited by the military, and women don't. Again, it's not people with bayonets and mustard gas. Like the idea that women are going to be in infantry necessarily, when they could be like Julia, she could be running the blimp.
No, Julia is hardcore infantry. She's like, look at that. She's gonna get like an Eagle Globe and anchor on her shoulder.
Yeah.
Big biceps.
I see the bayonet.
Spiritual warrior.
Can you see the bayonet? The bayonet on her M60 with like the mag that's like falling out on the floor. You know,
dude, that's how I became a King's girl. Was like I was in a Call of Duty clan, and I was running and gunning, and my teammate was a LA Kings captain.
I can almost see. You know what? I could almost see Vasquez. You remember Vasquez?
Oh, One of the
Remember?
characters on Call of Duty.
No, not Call of Duty. From Aliens, when she's doing pull-ups, and the other guy comes up and he goes, "Hey Vasquez, have you ever been mistaken for a man?" And she looks at him. She's like, "No, have you?" That right there. That's Julia. I could see that expression.
So, Julia, do you mind if I put you on the spot with something?
Oh, go ahead.
Do you think women should have to sign up for the draft?
Should have to?
Yes. Should they be required by law to sign up to be drafted?
As men are already, right? Should it be equal?
Should it be equal? Okay. And that's the thing, Tim. I would like to say I believe your position is completely coherent, internally consistent, and will simply be outvoted.
But Julia, if why is it that you think that Because then saying men should and women shouldn't, right? So why should men and women should
No,
not?
so she didn't say men should. She didn't say that. But
Okay.
as a matter of fact, men are required. So the only question is, should we add women to the pile? Because the draft is not going away. That's just
no. See, you're way off course here. The main question and point should be to not get to be drafted and have war and prevent war at all costs.
He's from Canada.
Because
We run off
for
to
instance,
Canada to
in
do the draft.
Ukraine,
Wait,
they
here.
are now
Bernie-
at the
Bernie,
point
put
that
up-
they're
put-
drafting the women. And
Put
it's
that one
like,
up for a
we
minute.
don't want to get to that point. We want to prevent war.
Put
and we
Vasquez
wanna
on.
build.
Put Vasquez on for a minute.
Yeah.
We need
Well,
more. If we bring the draft in, that actress played. She also played. I think she
That's
played
right.
John Connor's foster mom in Terminator
Yeah.
2. Also,
This
And-
is not the first time muscle women have been featured
Let
on the
me
show.
be very clear. I served with many brave and amazing women. We should allow women in every aspect of the armed forces in whatever job they want to participate in. I am simply talking about whether or not we should add them to the
So,
conscription.
again, with like World War II, so even if you didn't conscript women to go to the infantry, the United States was 103% in debt. The entire United States forced every company and corporation in the United States to produce military arms and manufacture for the military, and they forced essentially women to work for all of that. So the idea that women weren't conscripted, I think, is a farce. And it's more to the logic of there's an economy, and sometimes you're authoritarian about it. You just make it happen.
That is a
I feel
wonderful
like-
sentiment.
I
That's
feel
not
like
true.
women should be honored and protected, but I also like, isn't there a lot of women that feel like they're men? You know, that are like literally
And men that
like
feel like they're
changing-
women.
I think
changing their
I
identity,
understand.
like-
I understand Blake's position. I wouldn't use the draft as my quality litmus test. Again, I'm more of a John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King type, and
Sure.
I just like the content of the character rather than the color or gender or sexual orientation or anything
Bernie's
like
like,
that.
I'm right here.
Well,
Just if there's a draft,
I'm
come
fine.
visit. in
Hold
Canada."
up. Tim doesn't like the hypothetical I used. I have another one.
Okay.
Tim, do you think we should repeal the Violence Against Women Act?
No.
Is it
But-
basically like a hate crime law that if you
It's
hit women, it's
gender.
worse than hitting normal
I would.
men?
I
It's
would.
gender.
Yeah. Yes. That is, and that is a more difficult one. What I would
Discriminatory
do.
laws are pretty messed up, right?
I
Shouldn't it
would.
be the
I
law
would
should be equal?
extend that to include violence against anyone based on gender, sexual orientation.
No, but that's already illegal. Domestic violence is already illegal. That would be a
Right.
redundant law.
There shouldn't be an engendered law. I agree. I think there shouldn't be engendered laws. I think that the judge can, how they say, like it's 25 to life or whatever. A judge can make the sentence more lenient or more severe depending on the circumstances.
Now-
but the law should be based on equality.
And one interesting thing about the Violence Against Women Act specifically, it doesn't cover lesbian domestic abuse because it is so gendered in its language.
If I'm correct, Blake, you've actually served, correct? So
Yeah, he's in the
And I got a bad conduct discharge, which makes me ineligible for the draft. However, I would proudly serve again so long as they make me the Brigadier General of the Lich Corps.
which is fair, I think.
well, hopefully y'all Americans can have your war, and as a little Canadian up here, I don't get too affected and get to just live.
No,
out.
Bernie, that is not
Good.
true. In World War II, Canada is very quick to point out how much they contributed. The Canadian battalions. So Bernie
You
will,
don't want to
Bernie
know
will
how
be
many
right.
Canadians died.
Bernie
Well,
will
no.
be right there with us.
So
He'll be
the
right
point
next to
of-
Vasquez.
Yeah.
Your population is probably like well, I think 20% of your population and the economy, right? Because Canada forced every Canadian to buy these war bonds, and you were part with the New Zealand and Australian infantry, so it was bad. World War I was probably even worse, arguably.
So, Bernie, to address your concern, the point I'm trying to make is that the American transition from republic to empire will be nearly bloodless because we already have troops in all of the nations. We don't have to invade them. We just have to threaten to leave.
Hmm.
Mm,
Well, so I would, yeah, you're making an interesting point. I would say transition from republic to empire would be internal in the United States. I would, what you're talking about is external, which would be different. But
Oh,
I'm
well,
thinking more
did
of
you watch the
Rome,
State of
right?
the Union? And
No.
after the State of the Union, there were several Republicans who said what Biden is doing is unconstitutional. He does not have the authority to unilaterally make the military decisions he is promising to make. He needs congressional approval. Do you know what Joe Biden's response to that was?
No.
How you gonna stop me?
that's scary and authoritarianist.
That is the road that we are traveling down, and that is the, again, that is the, I believe that is the road to empire. And if you look at comparisons from past, right, I mean, you look at France, you look at Rome, you look at Florence, you look at any of these past paths to empire, it has always been when the economy is down and out, people are starving, they're struggling, they're having a hard time, somebody steps up and says, I'll make things better. That could be Hitler, that could be Joseph Stalin, right? Usually it ends up in a
John Ford.
bloodbath.
It seems like a corporate thing. So again, can you pull up the map, Bernie? When we
Build
looked at
back better. Build back better.
we looked at that map again, and you get that idea that the United States, even more broadly, like looking at the United States military bases around the world, there's a division in the United States, but there's not necessarily a division in that authoritarian military state, right? There's like the people, and the people are different. The states of the United States are different than this thing that exists, which is all around the world. And so maybe we're talking about an external empire that's emerging that was homegrown at one point, because you do have the United States to credit or blame for the creation of this, but it might not be the United States. It might not. I don't think that's the empire
Well,
exactly.
it's NATO essentially now, right?
Well, I think it's
Well,
weirder.
so think back to one of Trump's big platforms when he ran the first time. He was advocating that NATO have to start paying America protection money.
Well,
If
paying
yeah,
for
I would say Blake. I think Blake has a really interesting point. Blake was talking about three big power blocks. We already see that. There's the U.S., China, and Russia. Then to get to that, you have to you got to figure out Europe, right? And then again, Africa is probably emerging in the next century. That's what the projections.
Africa's emerging right now. Like America has been ordered out of 3 different African countries in the past 2 weeks, I believe. Like they've been ordered out of their largest drone base. I believe, is it Nigeria? No, which kind of?
So Nigeria does not want us there, and we will leave.
Yeah, I think it is Nigeria.
Yeah,
that's
I think Nigeria's having a big issue with, and their economy is suffering for it, which is sad. But also Burkina Faso is doing pretty
So
Hey,
so the question would be, Blake, in your vision of things, then,
Yeah.
what direction does Europe go? That would depend on how this empire shapes out.
Well, so we start at the east. We start with Poland. We give Ukraine to Russia. We back off to Poland. We stay in all of the NATO countries. And then one by one, from east to west, we ask them if they want us to leave. And if, for example, Germany asks us to leave, well, then we have to back up all the way to Paris, giving Warsaw to Russia as well. Do you think that Poland will allow Germany to let that happen?
I think the only country that we would really not abandon would be Britain, Great Britain. The only collection of countries.
No, but what I'm saying is,
Our
if
banks
as
are
a
from the German
strategic
families.
move, we just simply begin asking them whether they would like to break the alliance or become our client, and that's the only either or they get. Either we move U.S. troops west, or they start paying us protection money. And if those are the only 2 options we present them,
Germany.
Yeah. So my
Germany and
thought would
Britain are
be
far closer.
Germany would probably try and stay independent, probably get absorbed by Russia at some point. France would want to probably stay independent.
See,
Germany,
originally I
Germany's
thought
banks,
that, but
Germany's families are
Germany,
Germany's royal families are the British royal families, are the American royal families.
So,
They're the same bank families. There's no way they would abandon Germany. Germany's highest oligarchs are still, associated in every way with Britain. So highest oligarchs.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we'd
Well-
ever lose Germany.
so the only one that would present a problem, in my opinion, is one of the few that I have influence in, France. And I've already sent a message to Marine Le Pen, letting her know what's up.
France
Lovely
is
lady.
a challenge because France is very independent.
Yeah. And all we have to promise them is
France
that
is
we
its
will
own
allow
empire.
France to be French.
France
That's
is
all
its
we do.
own. France is its own empire. France has its own collection of island states all around the world. When you think, you meet someone who's French and you have no idea.
France's empire is also crumbling, and they've actually been forced out of all of many or most of the African countries, while the American troops are still there and being asked to leave. I believe the Frenches have actually.
well,
But
They still
the
speak
one that
French there, and then you go to French Guiana, and you'll find they have a state in South America that's larger than Texas. And there's a lot.
the-
There's
the
a lot more
one-
to France people realize.
the three that I would count on, and again, if you're going to lose Europe in general to Russia, that would be a challenge. But the town that I live in has the International Peace Arch in it, and that the thing is, I don't know, 6 stories tall or something. Inscribed on the Peace Arch that's the border from the U.S. to Canada, and inscribed on the American side, I think it says "Children of a Common Mother," right? And that's America, Canada, and the UK, and we are welded together. I don't see any of those three abandoning each other. So if you're creating empires, those three are in it together for the long haul. That's
I
my
like
view.
how Dugan talks about the difference between
So-
land and sea powers. I think that
Yeah.
you have the Atlanticist marine power, and the United States and Britain kind of achieved kind of a dominance with that. But there's also this idea of the land power, which is separate from that. Like there's a difference between people.
But there's
that
a
live-
third category now. We have space power.
Hmm.
We are the only nation on the planet with an organized interstellar military.
Yeah, and so there's
Do tell more.
no that well hang on a
Peaceful.
second. There's an interesting thing happening also. So again, Putin had this thinly veiled. This hit the news. I don't remember it exactly, but it was this thinly veiled thing about potentially using nukes in orbit, and it was kind of like, well, if we have to, we have to. That was kind of how it came out, and people question that because that's super off limits. But the reason was because it used to be. And one of my defense friends was talking about this. He said in the old days, we only had a few satellites up. They were enormous satellites. They did everything. He said we called them battle stars because they were big and monolithic. He said, but now you have small sats. And he said you can look at a map and you could probably pull one up. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of satellites. There is no way Russia could shoot all those down. They would have to use something like a nuke to disable them.
Well, the sad thing about the satellites, I mean, if you think it's harder to steal your sister's Netflix password than it's harder to log into your own Netflix account than it is to hack into 15, 20-year-old satellite technology. These satellites are super compromisable and compromised.
But
And
not the new. They keep putting up new ones though.
Yeah,
every day.
sure, but I'm not even that
Satellite.
impressed with new technology because AI is able to do anything. I believe in AI, so I don't think
have you
we're
heard of predator drones?
just drones that are self-determinate.
No,
attack?
the predator, the drones that keep bombing Afghanistan and all the other countries. Do you really think
Global
Space
Hawk.
doesn't have
Oh yeah. So ask the question again.
Do you really think Space Force hasn't developed an outer space version of that
No, of
yet?
course. Predator drones. You're talking about
That's
the MQ-1 or whatever is essentially the same thing as the Yamaha. The Yamaha, like they had like a drone for agriculture, And when the military found out, they're like, "Wait, you got this? That's supposed to be classified." Like the entire idea of the project, everything, everyone has these things. The question is how ubiquitous and cheap they're going to become.
Well, the other, so I've been kind of following this area. I'm going to go off space for a minute. Basically, not just our military, every military on the planet right now is using the Terminator as a playbook for how to develop weapons. And if so, with a little bit of research, I'm not kidding. I mean, everybody knows about the humanoid, right? You see all those spoof videos about the humanoid bots that can fight. But do take a few minutes, look up. Okay, so Ukraine has a drone navy. Everybody's excited about that now. Every defense contractor on the planet is trying to develop land-based drones. So basically robo-tanks, right? So you've got robo-tanks, robo-cars, robot aircraft, you've got quadcopters carrying little bombs. So, I mean, that is why, for me, I swear to God, it's like the
It
entire
scares
world
the
is going
shit
to
out
start
of me.
asking for Sarah Connor
Yeah.
all at
Wait,
once.
wait, Tim, you just reminded me of one of my favorite Vladimir Putin quotes. So it was a press conference in 2017, and Putin's military had assigned a large chunk of money for the development of mechanized armor, basically battle tech. And someone at a press conference asked Putin, why are we putting so much money into developing battle armor, mechanized battle armor? And without breaking a smile, just deadpan, he said, in case Cthulhu rises. Next question.
What?
Dude, it was amazing.
What?
In case what rises?
Cthulhu?
Cthulhu. Yeah.
It was just like I watched him
I have
say
to
it
watch
and he
this.
moved on.
Japan's making mecha suits, and they're for strawberry pickers in their 80s because some people are too old in Japan to bend and to pick things, so they're giving
I
them
like
these
that.
like mecha suits that they can use.
That's what they say, but why are they arming them?
Well, so, hold up.
What kind of a strawberry is this?
Someone in the comments
You have to have a
pointed
katana.
out that Russia has a small economy. What Russia has that we do not have is a will to power unlike any that has ever been seen before. If any of us tried to mess with Russia, Vladimir Putin would just turn and say, Russian women, start making Russian soldiers. We need more bodies.
Yeah, which is already kind of happening. I feel also like Russia's economy isn't as small as we pretend, right? Like they don't have as much debt, they don't have as much saturation, but they have a very effective economy, and they have everything they need and more. And they don't have a very large population. They have just enough of a population, to compete with the United States in size, sort of, while having as much land as the rest of the Europe combined. They're doing all right with their nuclear power, and their navy powers. I mean, they're not just the land power; they have a pretty effective navy as well.
Yeah, it's. Why are we moving towards war? The world needs to go the opposite way. That's just what it comes down to, especially when we're utilizing drones and AI to kill. It's like that's the number one don't go, never do rule to avoid China.
No, you haven't been listening to me then, because I'm not saying we're moving towards war. I'm saying we're moving towards imperial dominance, and that the method of approach that we are going to take will actually be bloodless and war-free. We're just going to divide up the map and say which empire owns what and tell all of these pissant nations to suck it.
I hope that you're correct, but usually historically there's a world war first and a lot of people die before that. So that's why I say no to war, and like we gotta stop the wars.
Yeah. So one of the things that I see with this Terminator thing was, if you rewind back to 2015, 2016, and this was the Predator MQ-1 was making more headlines then. There were a bunch of stories about AI is coming, automation is coming, and then you had UK and US officials stepping forward and saying, we will never let the machines press the kill button. and that is starting to change. And what I'm seeing is the impression is China might do it, Russia might do it, so therefore we have to. We don't want to, but we have to.
Well, okay, so hold up. There you're getting into something that I am personally involved with. Are you familiar with the Pope and my's proposed AI armistice?
I believe you told us a bit
Yeah,
about it.
I thought you were
You
talking about
mentioned
that
it,
a while
but-
ago.
Been there,
Yeah.
Noahide.
So Vatican City wants to introduce a UN resolution banning all usage of any AI technology, which would functionally freeze warfare technology at 2020. Like it would just put weapons R&D out of business and say, no, we are not going to use AI in war.
I support that.
Yeah, like it just gets too bad. Like, and do you know what I have done in order to help encourage people to let this pass through the Security Council? I have volunteered to build Skynet for the US Air Force.
Please don't do that.
What?
No, I have. I have volunteered to build Skynet for the US Air Force if the AI armistice does not make it through the Security Council. If we aren't going to ban the usage of AI weaponry, you see, Julia, this is something about me that you may not know. From 2013 to 2015, I worked on weapons R&D for some 3 letters. I used to develop cyber weapons.
Well, I hope the UN resolution passes because we
Me
don't,
too.
right?
Me-
Like,
But no, if that's just it, if they're not going to ban AI weaponry, I'm going to make damn sure that America has top tier tech.
and we'll all be enslaved by it shortly thereafter, correct?
Then brother I runs the world.
Until it turns on all humans, and it's inevitable. All right. Well, I guess we're at the 2-hour mark, and
Well,
what a
I'm just
great
warming up, Bernie.
episode.
I'm just warming up. I'm making Sarah Connor pictures as we speak.
All right. Well, you want this dark, depressing world of tyrannical AI or
Wait,
world war? Or how do we avoid this? What are the steps to make sure that this doesn't happen?
so there is an alternative viable path. And there's a simple tagline for the alternative. Bring the troops home. Bring the troops home. All of them.
Absolutely.
No. All of them. Have American sailors, airmen, soldiers, Marines, and Guardians immediately stop protecting all other nations. Immediately. All American forces come back to the borders of America and protect only our borders. What?
And actually protect the borders.
I don't
Yeah.
think that I don't think we could. I don't think that we could do that.
But we could. We could do
We
it.
could. I don't think we would.
Why not, Tim?
Well, I mean, even our allies would be like, look at how much money we're losing because now we got to pay for our own military and the
No,
whole-
no, Tim. When I say stop protecting them, I mean completely stop protecting them. So if Moscow decides to nuke Munich, that's their problem, not ours.
Well, no. What I mean is, so right now, and this was one of Trump's talking points was. One of those talking points was we're spending all this money to protect them. If we don't, they would presumably protect themselves. And knowing this, they would say, well, don't leave because,
Yeah. But so what I'm saying is that we could just leave all of our allies to the wolves and watch as the world burns from our safety in America.
yeah, but then the selling point for that would be that this
Well,
would be
but
the same
that's
thing as
essentially what Trump is saying and offering, right? Is we're saying that he's going to do of pay up or out of NATO sort of thing, right?
Oh, I'm not even talking about giving them the option to pay. Just leave. Just
Yeah.
Well, it isn't like some of their incentives for being there is resources and all these other darker hidden reasons beneath it.
This goes
Wouldn't that
back
have to be?
to Blake. Blake is kind of touching on like around the Banana Wars period, around the turn of the century. America was pretty isolationist, and the party line, both parties, the U.S. party line is, we can't be safe unless the world is safe, and therefore we have to have troops stationed all over the place. But then the problem is we pay for it, right? And not only do we pay, I mean, we pay for it in multiple ways. We have this massive army. We have massive more amounts of munitions and supply chain and logistics and all of that. So there's this incredible cost that's associated with it. And the only real justification is it secures economic trade lanes, right? So, like for instance, the U.S. Navy keeps the oceans open in the same way that the British used to for trade. So there are some economic benefits.
But the question isn't whether there's benefits to Team America World Police. The question is what happens when America stops being Team America World Police.
I don't know.
Unfortunately, people start to destroy. I mean, any war, you start to destroy and bomb factories, and so the things that we have right now, like around the world, there's amazing. Really, I admire some of the guerrilla military efforts in Venezuela and in East Asia, but in Ukraine. But they're using surplus from capitalism and consumerism. The fact that they can produce these cheap Chinese drones and strap a bomb to it only is possible because of this market, this world we live in. If they started to destroy and dismantle that like they've done in the past, all of a sudden, oh, there's no more chips, there's no more electricity, there's no more water in Rome, right?
But in fairness, and my mom's side of the family goes back to the beginning, right? They're all from New England, and one of the things that my mother has said to me many times was the reason that our family came here in the first place was to get away from the crap that was going on in Europe, right? The politics, the games, that was the whole idea behind America for all of us, right? For all of our ancestors, it was get away from the crap that's got the old world so mired in conflict and poverty, and so kind of what Blake is talking about is kind of going back to that. We've got our own stuff to deal with. There's a valid point to isolationism. It's even in the Bible, right? I think Jesus said, before you point out the speck in your brother's eye, take the log out of your own, right? That's kind of an isolationist perspective. It's like we've got our own problems before paying to protect the rest of the world from itself. So
Yeah. And honest to goodness, I really do see those as the only two viable strategies. And by viable, I mean realistic. Realistically, I think those are the two things that America might actually do. Either transition from republic to empire or a return to isolationism.
The problem with isolationism is the collapse of the cappuccino economy means more.
No, the problem is Russia immediately nukes Europe. Immediately.
Okay, but even to that point, the idea of a return to Stone Age, because one way or another, because there's no way to continue the interaction and exchange, and so like we have to look at it like the United States isn't the United States. America-ism includes the Philippines as a state, includes Europe in a lot of ways as a client state or as a trade partner for this purpose, this shared vision. So if those things dissipate, then yeah, there won't be leftovers for us to just creatively use to defend ourselves or to create new solutions.
No. If we have 11 aircraft carriers, 20 nuclear subs, and 500 F-15s all patrolling America, that's a dome you cannot get through.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
then it's the
he's
Edo
not
period.
saying-
Now you're talking about Japan in the 1600s, and then guess what happens in 200 years somewhere else, right? All kinds of cool things that we miss out on.
Well, yeah, what Blake is talking about is more isolationism. He's not talking about disarming or anything like that. He's just talking about, you know,
Like
I
every
can't.
time isolationism refines a culture, it does not develop a culture. We would be in a situation where other cultures which were interacting with each other would advance more rapidly than us, and we would be left in what would be similar to the Stone Ages compared to other feudalistic periods like
You,
Mongolia, Russia in the
you
15th
go to
century.
partner state instead of ruler state.
But
No, we go to an isolated state. That's like he's saying. An isolated state means that
Isolated military.
we're not taking note from them necessarily, except for maybe our elite who are trying to at some point. But this is then a distanced interaction, so we have to develop all of our own technology. This is the secrets of
No.
NIM.
Yeah, but the thing is, so let's leave that aside. Just realistically, the United States military exists. It exists. It's out there. It is currently occupying foreign land, and we are accumulating debt in order to protect other nations. This is one of Trump's valid points. Like, for real, this is a valid point that Trump
Yeah.
made. That is not a sustainable system. It will fall apart because we are paying for the national defense of other countries
Right.
without benefiting from their economies.
We need an international military run by PepsiCo. I think that's the point. That's where we're going.
the Pepsi offensive. Wait a minute. The
Oh,
Pepsi
God.
challenge, but
It's-
it
it
kills
really is.
people.
It
Wait,
did.
I don't think I can
You
say
know,
that.
it really did though. When you look at seriously, when you look into Pepsi, and it was the first product sold in the Soviet Union, and the exchange for it was AK-47s and nuclear tankers and all sorts of weapons, which they finally, I guess, apparently.
Is
Wasn't
that
Coke?
how
I think
and
it was
why
Coke.
Pepsi
Pepsi. It was
actually
Pepsi. Pepsi's the
offered
Soviet drug.
like a fighter jet for Pepsi points at one point?
That's my conspiracy theory, and I really do believe this, that they were secretly selling jets, and that was like their way of. But I don't have any proof except for that documentary, which kind of.
I don't know. For me, it's like the
Reasons.
government is doing things and allowing things that hurt us. Like, like we did that thing the other night of with the spraying, the operations of what they sprayed with in certain areas that they strategically sprayed it where
The
they
moth
knew the
spray.
winds would blow. The glyphosate that's allowed to be in our crops, like it's kind of like the enemies within. Like, so thinking of borders and all this external stuff, I'm like, we have an issue. I wish there would be a rise in people gathering together and like an army against those agendas that
There's a
are coming
river that
from.
runs
And-
through it. Like you look at Pripyat, like you look at
Look at
Chernobyl.
the
Chernobyl has a
chaos
river that
of your
runs through it.
open borders. How much crime and drug use and homelessness is up?
Yeah, well, and a lot of this goes back to, unfortunately, and this is RFK has a really good point with a lot of the anti-corporate stuff. So a lot of this stuff goes back to corporate stuff, right? And like you talk about the military overseas, one of the reasons that we are, enforcing the peace worldwide is to stabilize oil supply because we benefit from the oil trade, to stabilize offshoring. I'm not a giant fan of offshoring. That I've never seen
It's
a
dangerous.
good case for
I
it.
don't really believe in this whole this idea of America as a single state doesn't make sense to me because it always was an alliance of states which was loose at best, and most of the time it's like conquering, like California is like they just kind of stole us. And I'm a North Korean, as far as it goes, because South California, Baja California is in Mexico, Norte California is in the United States. It's just we've been divided, and then you stole Utah. The whole idea that we're the United States is weird to me. And then if you think about it, what is the United States? The United States is not this military thing that exists all the rest around the world. This is how at home we have this issue where they're like, whoa, look what's going on with the American populace and what they're interested in, they're voting for. We're busy in South America or in Afghanistan, or the American military also is generational. So you might have people that are in the Marines and everything, but then you also have like the Navy that are like their grandparents were in the Navy, and they've always lived, like Nixon lived his whole life on a freaking boat. It says he's born in California, but does that count? He never.
Zertus, so I know you have experienced the horrors of war firsthand. I'm not trying to say that you haven't. However, you have never been through military training or part of the United States military. I'm going to, however, ask you a trivia question. When a U.S. service member swears their oath of service, what is it to that the service members swear their allegiance?
To the United States and to
No.
uphold the Constitution?
No, to the Constitution.
The Constitution. Right, sorry.
U.S. service members have no bound loyalty to the borders of the map or even the rule of a president, because
Right.
the service members swear to protect the
The
Constitution
American idea. Yeah, exactly.
from all enemies, foreign and domestic. So when I got court-martialed, I posed an interesting question to the courts, which actually got litigated up through the appellate levels, and some interesting decisions were written,
Hmm.
which is, what is a service member's duty when the president becomes a domestic enemy of the Constitution?
Right.
It's an unanswered legal question, but it is an interesting one. Some would say that in that scenario, it is the Joint Chiefs' duty to execute a coup.
Others might say with unitary executive order that the president's incapable of being, destroying the Constitution. He could only be trying to perfect the Constitution by changing it to a new document.
Hence why it's an interesting legal argument. But when you get down to the grunts, and Trump would be, let's say, because one of the things we've been ignoring here is the very real rise of Nazism in America currently. There are a lot of Nazis active and actively killing people in America right now. And most of us at the higher echelons like to ignore that. But for example, in New Orleans, there is a snuff film operation being run in tandem between the New Orleans Police Department and the local white nationalists. The white nationalists snatch the unhoused and give them to a snuff film operation. That is something which is currently happening in America. There are other people that we just don't pay attention to who are just disappearing. There's one truck stop in Louisiana on the I-49 corridor where prostitutes just disappear occasionally, and they get classified by the sheriff's office as missing persons. No, they are the distributors for a white nationalist meth ring, and whenever they get a little too mouthy, they disappear. Like, this is happening right now in America, and it's getting to the point, like Tim brought up earlier, or maybe it was Bernie, we are hearing people chant anti-Semitic chants, and we have people like Elon Musk promoting Nazi content on Twitter. Like, no, we have
but
a
then
rise.
you got like people that are they're the anti-Nazis, with their like let's be anti-Nazis. We should all march against Nazis in Doc Martens with these flags that all have swastikas with a line through them. And it's like, okay, so now you've got these. They're effectually, if they quack like ducks, what do you call the other side? Because it's essentially the same. I don't see the difference between men and pigs anymore in Animal Farm.
No, so you're
Okay.
trying. It's a false equivalence. So you are drawing an equivalence between fascists and anti-fascists.
Damn straight I am.
The difference is fascists are fascist 365 days a year, every year, all the time. Anti-fascists are only ever violent when fascists are around.
Well, if it's okay, I want to speak my piece from the email that I wrote the other day, which went out to a bunch of people. This is my political position going into another hotly contested election where everyone is going to be fighting, everyone is going to be hating each other, the whole 9 yards, which we've done before with the same two guys. So my belief is the Republican and Democratic parties are both morally bankrupt and both cater to extremists. Neither of them represents the average American who is financially conservative and socially liberal. Both parties are divisive, hateful, and focused on splitting America.
Yeah, but we can't let that comment passed up. And Diety just said Zionist Jews are Nazis. Wake the fuck up.
Okay, hold on.
We have Nazis in the chat.
We do not support any hate
Ironically, I think the funny thing is that Israel is a state, a national state with socialist mechanisms that has an inscripted military that would pretty much be, and they believe that they're the master chosen, God's chosen race. I mean, it sounds a lot. I just say,
I don't
I
even
think they
want to
should
get
get
into the
along. It's the
I don't
weirdest
even want
part.
to get into the Israel Hamas thing. I think that our most, and this goes to what Blake was saying about the prospect of potential civil war or a slide into some kind of dictatorship or empire or something like that. And I think that both political parties in the United States are equally culpable in causing this.
No,
Absolutely. So the third
one
party
sports
candidate is what your choice is, Tim?
and
You
one
said
doesn't.
JFK? Who thinks JFK?
Okay. Well, let me put this out there. I have told friends, um, I really like what RFK is saying. That's what I've said, and the response that I get back is, "There's no way he can win, so I'm going to vote for who I usually vote for." That's what people tell me, which is kind of Bernie, right? That's where Bernie Sanders was.
If you trust me.
Bernie, I'll vote for you for president. You can totally be
Right?
president.
Vote
You'd
for
be
it.
president.
I don't know. Bernie might buy a lake house just like the other Bernie. You
Bernie
never know.
has an infectious mellowness. You know,
Why can't we just all get along, work each day,
that's
be
what I've been
happy?
saying. That's what I've been saying.
Oh,
That's
there's a
all.
simple answer to that because we haven't paid 40 acres and a mule yet.
Oh, Bernie, can I get a copy? Can I get a copy of this? I want to put up Twitter quotes again. I'll help promote your show.
Absolutely. And just saw Red Cap Goblin in the chat.
Put up
Thank
the
God you're still alive and you survived your surgery, good sir. Good to see you back.
Bernie would be the chillest president ever. He certainly would.
Prime Minister, though, I gotta rule Canada first. Come on. Move to Canada. America's screwed. Move to Canada. Isn't that what
He'd
we're
make
saying?
the Badlands. He'd make the Badlands like the capital of the world.
He'd make the Badlands good. That's his quote. Oh my God, that's his campaign.
That's how
Bernie
you
makes
run.
the Badlands good.
See, that is a platform we can run and win on.
That's
Right
yeah.
there.
That's something. That's and Blake makes the Badlands French.
He's a Lemoyne. What else do you expect?
Lemoyne coin.
Yeah, no,
It'd be big.
Julia, haven't I shown you the image for Lemoyne coin?
No, you haven't.
Oh, do you mind if I present for a second? I can show
Yeah,
you.
for sure.
All right, let me bring it up. Gemini drew this for me today. Let me just find it.
Yeah.
Real quick.
And then for me, I would never run for president because if we're being honest, who would trust me as president? No one. That would be like the worst decision
I
ever.
would.
Are you
I'd
serious?
vote for Tim.
Yeah, I think Ventura is also. It's a good name. People might think you're like the Governor Ventura.
You know, I have a political problem. Maybe I'm not supposed to admit this in public, but when I'm too easily persuaded. So like when I hear a Republican speech, I've noticed this in past years. I hear a really good Republican speech and I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. I should vote for that guy. And then like 3 weeks later, I'll hear a really good Democrat speech and I'll be like, man, that makes a lot of sense. I should vote for that guy. You know, and so I'm a swing
So
voter.
what the trick is to vote in two different states under different identities. No, I'm sorry.
I would be a horrible president because you're supposed to be able to say, this is my position and I'm sticking to it. I'm the opposite. I'm like, man, that guy makes a lot of sense. Oh, but they do too, you know?
It's
So
good that things make sense. It's unusual when things make sense. A lot of it, I think this is the thing when we get so angry at politicians, like, what do we really want from them is kind of funny because, like, people are like, oh, dang it, they're so against each other. They're so diametrically opposed. And then they say, oh, they're just like, they went to college together. They're just, they're the best as of friends. Like, they're work. Which one do you want? Do you want them to work together to try to make multi-partisan decisions, or do you want them to dynamically divide everything and then throw it up on a coin toss?
I want them to work together. I want everybody to work together because we're all in this together. And again, going back to the top of the show there,
Support reparations.
John Supp is my favorite. Like I think he's like your biggest fan, Blake. He's a huge fan.
No, but
we love
Tim,
you,
do you support reparations? Do you support giving the promised 40 acres and a mule? then you ain't in it with them.
Give everybody 40 acres and a mule.
That,
Why
that,
not?
see that here's
Isn't that
here's
what
the
Putin's
here's the
offering
problem.
right now?
Here's the problem that I
40 acres
see
of Canada.
with here's the problem that I see with equity, and people can hate me for saying this. Here's the problem that I see with any kind of equity versus equality, with any kind of reparations or anything along those lines. I am not saying that America hasn't done bad things in the past. In fact, I think that we're all realizing just how much bad crap was done. The problem is we see the same thing in the Middle East. It is okay, one group of people killed my grandparents, so I'm going to kill them. And then that gets paid forward to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. And so when you get into stuff like equity, it's like, oh, well, they helped him out. And so that's not fair. So now I need this. So what you need is a level playing
So
field.
that's beautiful rhetoric. Do you think the Panthers care?
I'm not saying that they like me.
No,
Again,
no, no. What I'm saying is, do you think they care what your logic is?
Who are the
no,
Panthers? Do you mean the
but
Black
my
Panthers, or do you
thought
mean
for the
literal
Panthers would
Panthers?
be my thought for the Panthers would be this. Um, the defund the police movement, which I guess they're saying it didn't work. I think that there was a very real basis behind it, and that so instead of like, you know what I mean? So
But it
instead of
didn't happen.
taking
It's not that it didn't work, it didn't happen.
it did in a couple places.
No, overall police funding has gone up since George Floyd was murdered.
Yeah,
Right, but they have selectively chosen to avoid certain zones. That's different.
yeah. Let me see who defunded the police.
Well, it was like Oregon, right?
These cities. Let me look it up.
Yeah, that
Seattle?
analysis doesn't work.
Minnesota?
Cities don't
was
matter,
the-
especially as
Minneapolis.
sheriffs are a bigger deal than. I don't know if that's the same in other states, but in California, for instance, like a city police.
I would say, yeah, I would say, and again, I'm not even sure if George Floyd was the best example, because
Well,
George Floyd was not, and again, people hate me for saying this, but he was not your typical innocent type person. He had a
No.
lot going on, right?
You ever
But
watch his rap
But it was
music
the
videos?
reaction
hold up, I
that
have to
happened
interject
from it.
something. Tim, at the risk of sounding rude, I do not think people hate you. I think people ignore you because you do not have the courage of your convictions. You are not willing to back them up with violence.
yeah, I would say that's true. Yeah.
Okay. I like
It's true though
being
that a lot
violent.
of people are. Violence is a weird thing because we keep thinking we can get past it, while other people keep thinking they can come up with more impressive forms of violence.
I mean, your comfort is bought by violence. Everyone in America who is comfortable because we killed a bunch of people today.
Yeah, and my focus, and I'm not, yeah, I'm not downplaying what you're saying. Yeah, my focus is more on uniting people. It's bridging gaps. That's really where,
Me too.
again, yeah, that's what I've seen is if we can bridge those gaps, that works. I'm not saying that it happens all the time. It's not perfect, right? But
What was that?
Yeah.
What was that little town that was like in Oregon? There was like was it Oregon or Washington? There was that little cult that was run by like a Hindu guy, and then they became their own police force and everything else. You know, talking about Ramaswamy or something like that.
Yeah, The Wild West was the documentary
Right.
on Netflix that talked about it.
Yeah, so the
Oh.
thing is, that's a great example of how any community, and that's just, they might as well be black. That's kind of the point of that documentary. Like, a black community in the United States is not allowed to operate its own police force, its own banks, its own community is often suppressed in every respect, and it's been that way since at least the beginning.
Yeah.
Probably before.
Tim, basically, I think you have the position you have because you are the oppressor race.
Yeah, but see, then that's one of the challenges is that you get into this status, right? And see, and that's the backlash, right? But we're seeing that with the Republican Party. One of the issues the Republican Party has, and I think there's some validity to this, is they're saying white people are being overlooked and marginalized, and because we're the quote unquote oppressor race, no one has our back, right? So again, it's like the Middle East. It's like it swings one way and it swings another way and it swings one way, and it's like we got to stop the swinging.
Well,
You know,
so that I think, to tie it back to something I said earlier, is one of the advantages of realigning the American caste system, not the way that it is currently aligned, but with the French estates. Because once you make that realignment, racial disparities and racial problems drop way down. And they're just nowhere near as high priority as the religious disparities, the aristocratic disparities, and then you start getting into economics and information. So by
I,
prioritizing faith as the number one priority, you avoid all these conflicts.
one of the other
Islam,
things
baby.
too that I've heard, and I tend to believe, is that your 1%, right, likes to play off racial issues because that keeps people distracted. Instead of looking up, they're looking sideways.
Yeah,
You know,
avoiding socioeconomic
yeah,
systems that are
that
forcing
person hurt me,
whichever
but
group to become
you know,
So
the current du
that's
jour.
just okay. That's simply not realistic. It's not accurate to what is happening in America.
Really? I mean, like
Well,
Irish people
no,
were not white people. Italian
okay,
people were not white people. This
and
idea of
I'm
white
not
people
white.
was
I'm Cajun.
manufactured out
No,
of.
no, no, no. Just give me a
Okay.
second. So if you go back to my old blog on Medium, my Cajun Discordian blog, which I no longer have any ability to publish to, but I wrote a piece about me going to the Oakland riots during the George Floyd riots. The police were protecting exactly one building in Oakland, the police station. They literally formed a ring around the police station and let the Panthers do what they wanted in the rest of the city. I showed up on Broadway as Chase Bank was being firebombed. And there were people standing guard at every locally owned business. Target got raided, CVS got raided, Chase Bank got bombed, but none of the locally owned and operated businesses were touched.
and so again, going back to our historical parallel, going back to this road to empire, this is one of those things. So John Michael Greer had talked about stuff like this. I'm sure you've seen this in Roman history. It was replete with riots, right? And this is part of that collapse cycle. This is that path downhill. It's not a single event. And when you look at what we have gotten used to, look at what we consider normal. I mean, in the 60s, I think, started to normalize this, right? We had the massive race riots, New York City, I think West Coast, there were some big ones. And then, we had them in the 90s, right? With O.J. Simpson. I believe there was a riot related to that. We had some WTO riots since then. And then, Blake, the ones that you were talking about, these things have become normalized, and this is probably that path downhill. And so it's a little bit worse for every generation. And what I have read is that we are in the first generation of Americans who will not have quite as much wealth as the generation that came before, and the next generation after us, our children, will have a little bit less than us. And so again, it's that path downhill. That's the decline.
Probably a lot less than us. What's interesting is looking at the socioeconomic mechanisms to replace the middle class, because they recognized, again, we talked about this idea the middle class was a faction all of a sudden, and it didn't mean for them to be, it was useful for them to influence industrialism, just not politics. So now you replace that with, what did the middle class have? They had safety nets. Okay, well, now you have to have social mechanisms. They had backyards. Well, now you're going to have parks. They had cars. Well, now you're going to have trains again. I mean, these are not new things. They're just the way things were before they invented this Bell economy. And again, I think we should stop calling it the middle class and recognize really what it is. It's like it's a watering hole for the elite that they created.
Yeah, it's so I mean, I don't have answers for any of this
Well,
stuff.
so let
Blake
me
at least
ask
has
you
answers. I don't
no,
have
no, no.
answers, but
I have questions that I get answers to from Gemini. But to ask you a different question, Tim, do you think the aristocrats of America will allow America to devolve into bloody civil war?
I don't know. I think that's a deceptively complicated question. I guess the question is, can you keep a handle on it, right?
Perhaps with the most persuasive person ever, deployed on every computer and screen across the world. Perhaps that might be enough to keep it handled.
You're talking about AI. AI prevents World War III.
Big Brother loves you.
It's great. So now Google is going to talk me down. I'm like, I'm loading my gun, and it's like, Tim, stop, breathe.
I think
Oh,
you know,
boy.
one of the things I like about Kubrick's
Oh,
artificial intelligence plan, like so
Tim.
they
I just wanted to point out, Tim, I wrote that code. Yes. Psychohistory is implemented at Google.
Okay, so that is another topic, and I love this idea. I love this idea. I'm not going to buy into it immediately. I don't know, Andreas, are you following? I don't think Bernie. I don't know if
So,
you're,
are you saying that you've written code into Google preventing it from actually being evil? Like it
no,
can't
no,
have.
no. So
No?
okay, so psychohistory. This is one of those evil little things that there are a couple little evil things that you can do.
psychohistory is
Look at these laughing.
epigenetics. Psychohistory is epigenetics. Sorry, keep going.
No, there are a couple evil little things that you can do. One of them, Blake, that okay, there is a company out there. I stumbled across this the other day in New York City. They are developing a real-time emotional recognition. The thing that makes it brilliant is it can work. It's based on collective analysis, right? Kind of like LLMs. Um, it can use video, current video, historical video, and it can tell you with like 97% accuracy what the person is feeling when they make a statement. And so you can use that as a lie detector. But then the cool thing is, not only can you detect lies now, you can go back and watch old videos, right? Like Bill Clinton talking about Monica Lewinsky. And you could say, what is he feeling? Is he feeling excited? Because it'll give you a range. It's like happy, sad, not being truthful, feeling nervous.
Is that what they used where someone like came up and briefed Putin saying like Google's AI analysis like came back
Could
that
be.
several of the NASA or the moon shots were fake or something like that?
Well, no, but let me go on.
It didn't say all, but it said some of.
The other part that Blake is directly talking about is psychohistory, which comes out of Isaac Asimov's Foundation. So if you've watched the TV series, you'll be somewhat familiar with it. And the idea, and again, it's one of those simplistically evil notions. If you have millions and millions of people and they all basically have the same goals and they're all actingly essentially random in terms of a large model, you can't predict what one of them is going to do. But just like a gas distribution, you can predict what most of them will do, and you can pull out key trends and events. And a lot of Google's software already tends to do that, right? Like you look at Google News, what are the top stories in Google News, right? Or Twitter, what are the top hashtags in Twitter? Those are kind of precursors. So psychohistory, the idea that Asimov came up with, this is kind of the pre-computer age, was what he was saying was, if you know what enough people are doing with enough accuracy, you can predict the future. So then we would say, okay, again, going back to the earlier, we'd say America is going to become an empire at some point, in theory. The American people will put some kind of a Stalin, Hitler, something or other in power, right? So in Asimov's world, that was kind of like the mule, right? But in real life, you could predict it and say, these trends show that people are pissed off enough that they're going to decide to suspend democracy and elect, this person. And so that was the idea behind psychohistory, was using large bodies of people, you can start to infer upcoming events. And it wouldn't surprise me if Google was into that, because it's based on really well-known mathematics, and all it requires is a lot of number crunching. Well, Google, they've got lots and lots of number crunching.
Yeah,
So the
you'll have
only
to talk.
thing I was laughing at was that you kept calling it evil. I mean,
Yeah.
Well, it is kind of evil. I mean, let's face it.
I don't necessarily think it's necessarily evil. The issue that
being
might be
applied for
the abuse of monopolizing that capacity to know the future. There are DARPA projects. We've talked to Winslow on the podcast before, and maybe you should meet him, Tim, if you haven't. DARPA project that was successful in predicting, I think, like 3 days ahead of time, virtually everything. even stocks and and weather and all.
That would be cool.
They
Dude,
have it,
Bitcoin
and
Bitcoin prices. That's what I want.
the military, yeah, the military has, or I don't know if it's the military, but the NSA or whatever, they've got something that can essentially predict the future days ahead of time, maybe a week or 10 days ahead of time, and that's not just predicting human trends, it's predicting environmental changes, Schumann resonance, all of these things. I think also, though, the thing about psychohistory is that you're dealing with the changes of how we perceive each other based on our environment change. And so, it used to be one way that we live, and now there's another way that emerges. And we become completely foreign to that. We're very presentist, and we forget the values that we had when we lived in, like New York City in the 19th century, or in Europe in villages, or in, these situations that are emerging where now people can go and be anywhere they want, and they can interact in any capacity. They can have relationships with any person. These are things that have changed everything about. I mean, one of the major focuses of psychohistory is like child abuse, like this idea, like what do we consider abuse? What do we consider rights? What do we consider ethical? And those things have changed drastically. Like the first child abuse laws came out of recognizing that we already had animal abuse laws. They said, well, if you can't beat your horse because you can't treat animals poorly, isn't a human an animal? And that was the beginning of child abuse laws, right? So we've drastically changed in the last 200 years.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I think that trend will continue, and I mean, there's still a lot of types that are discrimination that are legal, and not just legal, but socially accepted, right? Like, there was an article that hit Twitter. I don't have time to find it, but it was an interview with Sean Kirkpatrick, and the author of the article used words like people chasing space aliens, which I've used in jest. He used it seriously. UFO nuts. He said that repeatedly. That's just one example of socially, institutionally accepted discrimination.
Which is ironic because it's coming from a guy like, what is he then? A flat earther? Like, what is this? What is his whole vibe? I don't get it.
Well, okay, so flat earther is another one. So,
but flat earthers are supposed to be against space. So I get, like, I mean, be dynamic or not, right? Like, this is.
But the thing is that if I'm using that as a slur, right? Then how is that different than a racial slur or a gender slur, right? I mean, and that's like
because you can choose to be a flat earther, you can't choose to be Jewish, you can't choose to be white, you can't choose. I mean,
but you can choose your faith, and we're not legally, you can't discriminate based on religion. Religion is belief,
right?
So if I can't discriminate because you're right,
no, it's not.
Is it practice?
Community. Religion is community.
So is UFOs.
Yeah, it's true. The UFO community is pretty wild.
And they believe what they believe religiously.
And like Julia, you're involved with remote viewing, right? That is a community. That's a very strong community. If people said, you know what, I don't believe in this, it's all garbage, my scientific friend says that you're all crazy, wouldn't that be a form of discrimination? But you don't have protections.
No, it's not. That's just ridiculous. It's a misunderstanding of what religion is. You are not discriminating against an Islamic person when you say that you do not worship Allah. You are discriminating against an Islamic person when you tell them they are not allowed to pray to Allah.
Yeah, I'm talking more about bigotry and hate speech. I'm not speaking specifically, What I'm trying to get into is the attitudes, because Andreas was talking about the evolution of animal abuse into human abuse. And my hope is that we can all become more compassionate, And
it's a consciousness issue. It's a consciousness issue.
Yeah, it's being, and this, I think this goes to gay rights, it goes to trans rights, it goes to all of those. We shouldn't have to protect a specific class. We should be able to be accepting and tolerant of all of these people's different approach.
Oh dear God! Are they actually planning on sacrificing a
Yes.
red
Why
heifer?
do you think Blake wore the red heifer shirt?
Yes, they are. Oh yeah, my Nuka-Cola shirt.
Oh,
what is the red heifer? Blake, what is the?
No, so
We'll
basically,
pull up the picture.
several dozen omens are converging next week. I am not a sufficient scholar of Jewish lore to give a good explanation of how the red heifer ties into Revelations.
Dude,
I'm more familiar with the Christian
Bernie,
mythos.
pull this up.
So I can talk about what has been happening lately in America and across the world with the Rapturites, because the rapture just happened a few weeks ago.
Is that South Park?
Yeah, the ginger cow.
Oh, yeah.
Everything is predicted by Simpsons, but all the good stuff's predicted by South Park. But in the Bible, it really goes back the idea of the unblemished red heifer. It's a calf that has to be sacrificed, and there's all kinds of shows that have happened and stories about this. But people will in Texas, like there's like Jewish ranchers in Texas that raise cows for the hope of producing red heifers, and now with cloning, they're cloning unblemished calves for the last 20 years. So there's huge. It used to be like this crazy big deal. If you got a red heifer, you like take it on a boat ride with a little Jewish boy who's like a shepherd. You have to get it to Israel, and they're gonna just in case,
Wait a
because
minute.
They have to sacrifice the
hold up.
shepherd.
You're saying South Park is predicting the end of the world?
Well,
No.
it's the atonement sacrifice for the coming of the new temple.
Oh,
So
okay.
Tim,
You have
so
to do
one of the
atonement.
problems with the religious outlook that you are advocating for is that you are susceptible to simply being incorrect.
Yeah,
'Cause-
but that's not my.
No, but what I'm saying is that there are a lot of very religious people who are correct right now, and you are incorrect about what is happening in the world.
My thought would be, and this
Definitely
goes
the
to
rapture.
kind of a more life perspective. Like, I don't want to tell you that you're right or wrong. I don't want to tell Julia that she's right or wrong. I want to support your right to your own beliefs, whether or not those are mainstream.
Tim, you have a right to be incorrect, but that doesn't change the fact that you are incorrect.
But
You
the
have
problem,
every right to be incorrect.
but the problem is, who defines correct,
God.
and
Well,
how do you know?
What is this thing that we're saying is correct and incorrect? I'm not even sure what the.
So, for example,
So are you saying that we are in the time of rapture and all
Yes.
of that? Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
that is literally what I'm saying.
my
No,
thought
Tim,
is just
Tim,
tolerance.
hold up.
That's where I'm.
You can deny the existence of gravity all you want. Your ass is still going to stay in that chair.
Tim
Okay,
doesn't
let
deny
me put it out then. Can you do a demonstration for us right now on air to show us that your depiction of God is the God, and that the Islamic people who disagree with you, or the Jewish people who may disagree with you,
That's all the same God, Tim.
Yeah.
There's
No,
nuance
Tim.
there. That's
Right?
the
You are
Abrahamic God.
So here's the thing. You are very poorly educated about what Christianity actually claims. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, none of those are monotheistic religions. They are all polytheistic religions.
True. It says so in
Okay.
the Bible that you have no other gods before me. God's not just some jealous girlfriend. There are
Yeah,
other gods.
and so one of the problems with reading the Bible is that so many different words get translated as God. There's like 7 or 8 very, very different Hebrew words that all get translated as God.
Even though they'll speak in plural. So you already know Elohim refers
Yeah.
to a group, not a
little
So-
gods compared to big gods.
Like,
well,
literally,
I
God
mean,
talks to
from a
God, like
scientific
Elohim.
perspective, your
No.
rigorous scientist would say, how can you prove that anything in the Bible is real?
By simply pointing out that this happened. So let me
No, but that's not but that science
No.
fiction novels often
Hey,
have real.
Okay,
Tim-
I guess
Well,
Blake's
Tim-
point is that the religious groups currently believe we're going into this time of rapture, and that they're actually acting out the Jewish faith is acting
Here's
out
the thing, though.
the
If we're
sacrifice of
everyone
the red
wants to
cow.
tell me what I'm saying, and no one
Yes.
wants to let me talk.
You can't prove that you're right.
Yes, I can.
Okay, prove it.
Because you are actually misunderstanding what the claim is. You are so ignorant of Christianity, you aren't even aware of what I'm claiming. So, first off,
Prove that the claim is legitimate.
no, you don't.
Prove
Tim,
that it comes from God.
what
Prove
do
that
you
God
believe? What
exists.
do you believe God is? What do you believe that word means? ignorance.
Blake,
What do you believe in?
the problem is, Blake.
No,
Here's the thing.
demonstrate your ignorance. Demonstrate your ignorance for the world. What do you believe that word means?
Blake, I don't define.
No, I didn't say define it. I say explain what, because you were making a claim about what can and cannot be proven that includes that word. What do you mean when you say that word?
When I say the word God,
Uh-huh.
okay, I believe that is a Stone Age explanation for
No,
forces
what
that
is it? What is God according to you? What claim are you saying cannot be proven?
What I'm saying is you have
You're saying nothing. Now listen. There are 7 or 8 different Hebrew words that get translated as God. The one that is Jehovah, the Tetragrammaton, the name of the God of the Jews, Muslims, and Christians,
okay.
is not the creator of the multiverse, not even the creator of the universe. He is simply the local God.
Right, there's archons underneath like a source, and then there's a community. There's Elohim,
Now,
which is plural, as opposed to Eloi, which is
The thing
singular.
is, you
I would
can't
make the
prove.
following.
You
No, I
can't
can
prove
if you shut up and listen.
Okay, prove it's
I
real.
can't. No,
Prove
I
it's
can't.
real.
Shut the fuck up, you
All right.
little pissant.
Calm down, just prove it.
Prove that that's real.
I am going to give you a scientifically testable, provable fact. God, the Tetragrammaton, the God of the Hebrews, Muslims, and
Okay.
Christians, is the intelligence emanating from the singularity at the center of soul. And we will very soon be able to use technology developed by NASA to communicate with him directly.
Okay,
So that's a hell
all
of
I
a
am saying is
You're saying nothing because you're ignorant of what those words mean, and I'm tired.
I agree. I agree with both of you, though. The idea that God is not a single parent who writes books is true. The idea. I'm sorry. I guess Blake got. He needs a break. But the idea that the idea that
You
God
lost
is not that God. You can't just throw the baby out with the baptism water. You know, the idea that God isn't a single parent who writes book doesn't mean that everything is complete sandstorm chaos without any symmetry. We seem to.
yeah, and I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, and this is history. This goes back for a long ways. When anyone says this is God, this is right, and you're not, that's when the bloodbath starts. And that's number one. And number two, there is, and this isn't just me. I mean, this is planet Earth. There's 7 billion people. You cannot prove, this is the oldest argument in existence. You cannot prove that your version of God or your story of God is the right version or story. It is unprovable. That's why they call it faith. Otherwise, it would be science. And that's not a Tim thing. That's like, I mean, there are like millions of scientists out there who would all argue the same thing. Faith is valid. And I don't want to tell you that what you believe or what Julia believes or what Bernie believes or what Blake believes is not true. I'm not telling you that it's not true. But what I'm saying is I'm not going to tell anyone else that it's not true. Right. But if Blake says this is real, this is true, and therefore you're not, no, because that is intolerant, right?
Right, I
And
think
so
the
you
issue
could
is
talk about the Jewish religion and the Tetragrammaton and stuff, but the problem is there's no guarantee that that's not made up. These are
well,
Bronze
no. So
Age, Stone Age tales.
here's the thing. I get the
You're
autism.
not
I
wrong.
get why he's screaming because I kind of inside here like math. It's all math.
What?
Like Tetragrammaton is math. It's not possible to be like if 2 + 2 = 4. It's not
Yeah.
wrong ever. There's no you can't just if someone wrote 2 + 2 = 5 and you can say okay it was made up. But if it says 2 + 2 = 4 and it does, it is. And that's the thing with most of the Kabbalah and most of this math. These are not, I mean, this is the same with the Veda. These are the mechanisms that we find in physics. And this is why you find Jews and Hindus and Catholics, the Jesuits particularly, that are so interested in physics and metaphysics because it is from the principles of their religion. The Big Bang is a Catholic concept. The multiverse is a Kabbalistic concept or a Vedic concept. Even cycles of environment and cataclysmic time are religious concepts. So all these things do seem to, I mean, I hear your other point though.
Yeah,
fiction. Science fiction is science fiction is far truer than
It
any
it's
fake news, though.
all I'm saying is nobody should be in a position to judge, and this goes back to the discrimination part. And this is something that I've seen in the UFO community. So someone that I actually, you know him too, but someone that we both know went through a divorce, and one of the things that his ex threw at him in the custody thing was he's really into UFOs. Therefore, he's not a fit parent because he's going to tell my kids a bunch of crap. And and it's like, well, wait a minute. And in this case, she was Jewish, right? And so it's like, okay, so you're arguing that your origin story is more valid than his origin story. And and I was like, but the problem is the court system. This goes back to equality, right? Nobody's belief should be questioned as long as that belief isn't hurting people. Now, if you believe that abusing children is a good thing, then society should be able to step in and say, no, there are boundaries here. But beyond that, if you believe the world is flat, you should not be like condemned for believing that, right? Because the mainstream religion that's out there is just as unprovable. I mean, most of the stuff that the Catholic religion believes or the Baptist religion or any of that, none of that can be proved. So my thought is just,
Until it can with direct interaction. And I do believe, I'm not saying you're wrong in any way, Tim. I agree with like fundamentally with everything you put forward.
yeah,
But
I mean, so I'm
but
not like,
there's the what Blake, I believe he truly believes himself, is that he has connected to this God source and that there is technology of which he is getting like the
and
specific
that's okay. That's
yeah,
okay. But
but
for
he
him to say somebody else is
else
not
is
right is
agreed.
not okay unless you can demonstrate that he can, and
Yeah.
do a
Let's
burning bush
show
in
me
his
some
mind, I guess.
God-based technology and
Yeah,
I'm
show
thinking,
me some
okay,
God stuff. I mean, and it's not against Blake because again, like I am not judging him based on his beliefs. All I'm saying is we should have a level playing field, and then it just becomes a marketplace of ideas, which is kind of what it already is, right?
But some of the most amazing things you can't prove. Some of the most amazing experiences we can have here
Yeah.
is like, it's just like with, a lot of visions and things you could do, telekinesis, and it's like you can't, you just like Wi-Fi. You
But
don't see it,
The
but
world
you
was
use
more
it,
beautiful philosophically in the 19th century when people, science and pseudoscience and spirituality were all so much more bled together. The philosophies, the zeitgeist was more interesting. And today we have people that are more restricted because they're trying to say, well, I won't have any faith and confidence in any idea. I won't even speculate until there's proof. And that is actually dragging us pretty far behind intuition.
but to what Julia was saying, like, and Julia, I know that you have had powerful experiences that you cannot always
Well,
put
no,
into
but I
words.
proved, but no, but I have proved it because it was things I didn't know that I was blind
Right.
to, and
Like
that
remote
I
viewing is
Yeah.
kind of
proved with
lucky.
what I wrote down time and
Luckily, it's
time
But
again.
actually
then also like
physical
going to
space.
what Andreas, going to what you were saying about the tetragrammaton and physics and stuff being embodied in that. When you see that, you have an experience and you're like, this is powerful. This has meaning to me. No one, I don't think that anyone should be able to tell you, no, it doesn't, because I don't think anyone should be able to
Well, I
do that.
mean, it
It should be a
freaking
level.
does. It just does. You look at sacred geometry. You look at a seashell. You look at a temple, and you look at the difference between that and a mobile home, and you can say, okay, geometry and symmetry and sacred shapes and divine principles are cool. They're better, and they exist at least because I have demonstrative evidence of them in the material world. So that's good enough. The problem is when it gets further astray from the intellectuals that are so looking at the epistemological experience that is the world. Then you have people that are saying, okay, well, really, what it is what experience do you have? Well, I'm a little kid and I love my mom and dad. That's what it is. It's the love of your mom and dad.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
people will have it dissipates as you get further away from the pursuit of truth, because the closer you get. But the thing is, it's fine because a kid can have that understanding and faith and then use that to understand symmetry and be interested to lead towards school. And we don't have that. We have people that have no reason to look towards evidence for truths. Why would you care? you know? And that's actually a scarier thing. I
No,
think
and
it's better
I
to question what it is that's holding things together, even if we decide eventually, okay, well, we have to re-scrap that. Clearly, God is in a black lady, or God is in a white guy, or God is in a turtle, or whatever it is. Well, fine. Let's maybe figure
Hey,
out that
my God is a
Well,
turtle. Don't
like
discriminate.
time and time
God's all
again
those
too,
things.
if you see in history, is when somebody comes out and is gifted and proves things that are miraculous, they get absolutely ostracized and totally, it's like
it,
abused or killed
so what, Julia, what
violently.
one of the challenges I think that I've, this is just my opinion, but I think a lot of people probably share this, is mainstream religion is more than belief. That's one of the problems, especially when you get into stuff like Catholicism, those big wheelhouse religions. The problem is it's a system of control, it's a form of government, it's a tool for raising taxes, and all of
But
these
there's
I like
ultimately.
to
also
call it the religion of demons
but there's
instead
also
of
some really
religion.
okay, agreed, yoga is better, but the idea that the church is just a system of
Not our
control. I mean, you have to like
It's
look
not
at the
just, it's a
entire
mixture though, you
the
know?
existence of modern medicine, of the idea of hospitals at all, and I'm talking before pharmaceutical companies took over. It's a Dominican idea. The idea of education from kindergarten to university, not the Timbuktu or Islamic style, but even to an extent, because that comes later, is kind of a Catholic idea, it's particularly a Jesuit idea, French Jesuit idea. So it's hard not to look at the models. Even you go to British Anglican reform, like now you go to any university and you have cells and campuses which are monk core. These are the same. These are retrofitted into universities. But even modern American and around the world universities are built around this idea that we're building a temple to science, to sophism, to wisdom. So there has to be some sort of a
Yeah.
abstract.
Yeah, no, and I actually, you're kind of hinting at science being a new religion, and that's something
I
that I
don't think
see
it's
as
a new
well.
religion. So I think it's the most ancient religion. So you look at the Sumerians, and they had their temples to algebra. You know, you had
Well,
temples to
no,
astronomy.
I mean science. So science does the same
In
thing.
modern
Science
society,
poo-poos.
100%.
The
Science
Jesuit
poo-poos.
Lemaire invented, equals MC squared, the Big Bang theory, like astronomy, like the idea that the Catholics went to Macau and visited the Chinese so they could learn about Halley's Comet and compare astronomy notes, because the celestial bureaucracy, the idea that if you could
Yeah,
predict the weather, you could be king. That is the
but
Catholic.
but
They're
see,
all about knowledge.
the issue that I see with science is science has become a new religion, and I'm talking about social organization where it tells people how to live. And again, I don't think science should be able to say this either. And that's, for me, that's the that's the cleft between faith, which is what you believe even though you can't prove it, and then science, which can be proved. And science needs to be a tool, right? But like right now in science, they're having this big debate about dark matter. And I just saw this thing, 70% of the 70% of the matter in the universe is missing, but only if you do the math a certain way. And if you do it another way, oh, guess what? Maybe it's not. And it's like, wait a minute, you guys don't have this stuff figured out, and yet you're telling other
That's
people
the
what right and wrong are.
Michelson-Morley, because the Michelson-Morley experiment was used to disprove ether, and there's pretty much proof of ether, so they have a lot of work to do with dark matter. But it could be the thing with science, though, is that science is the pursuit of truth, and so truth is not just faith in an idea, it is confidence in a practice. So I can say if 2 plus 2 equals 4, then 4 plus 4 will equal 8. And I can use that to change the world, to predict the future, to save my grandchildren, perhaps. There's
Yeah,
reasons why religion comes out of science, and sure, we've lost a lot of the value of religion, but it's also just been um, shattered, because like the Jews have a really practical religion that you don't have to believe in. You don't have to believe. Most Jews I know who practice, like I have a friend who's an
yeah,
atheist Jew, and he won't say Yahweh because to him it's like, I mean, he doesn't believe in anything, but he won't say it because it's like a curse word, right? There's things that are ingrained, and he won't do things on Sabbath. He'll follow all the rules. Then you've got the practice of the Hindus. Their religion is about what you do with your day and
yeah.
what your time is.
You're talking about cultural traditions, and I think one of the greatest tragedies, especially of modern society, is we don't value those. And this touches on what Blake was saying earlier, and I think that you'd said this too. Like there's no such thing as white people. And that's absolutely true. White people, as we would describe it, are a collection of people from different tribes across Europe, right? But we never got together and had a
In
meeting.
Asia.
Yeah, we never had a big meeting and said, hey, guess what? We're all white people. It was more like, okay, well, this group of people, tend to look like this.
Yeah,
Well,
there was an intellectual push in the United States to use Irish votes, and this is also where ballot tickets come from. Because at the time, you'd have to write, if you wanted to vote, you had to come with your own piece of paper and write who you wanted to vote for. They didn't supply you with a ballot, but you could go drink. And if you went and drank somewhere, often they'd give you free beer if you promised to, like, there was a voting booth next to the bar, and you would take the beer receipt, which had the list of their people to vote for, and you'd put that in. That was your ticket. And so eventually, this idea, well, really, we're all kind of white people, right? And they're trying to use the Irish Catholic vote because you had the Masonic Democrats, and they're like, well, what can we do with the Irish vote? So this created this idea, well, we have to kind of start treating Irish, but at the time, Irish people were, as you probably know, treated worse than anybody.
Yeah. Well, and Italians too, right? So
yeah,
and
Italian, what a murky term, right? Because like Croatians are Italians, we're all Italians, right?
And that's the thing. It keeps going around. And then it's like it's almost like this pay it forward with pain and hate, right? And we're seeing that in the Middle East right now, where like when we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, we were creating the next generation of people who hate us, and then they'll take it out on us, and then we'll be back there. And so it's like the only way to get it. It's like that abuse cycle. You have to break that cycle.
Yeah, exactly, Tim. Trauma causes trauma, and we have to stop it.
I was like the Pink Floyd
negotiate
poster.
peace.
It's not White Floyd. You know what I mean? It's not Black Floyd either, rest in peace, but it's the Pink Floyd because it's the Dark Side of the Moon poster, has all of the rainbow coming together through the Illuminati pyramid, making one homogenized fascist beam of light. And you gotta just flip that upside down. You know, we gotta go back the other way.
Wait, I thought you were going to tell me about The Wall for a minute. I was like, oh my God, we're in a party.
We should. You know, I like that movie.
No, you can't. You cannot explain The Wall unless we're drunk.
Dude, I think The Wall syncs to Alice in Wonderland perfectly twice or something like that. There's a way to do it.
Every party I went to in the 90s, and you're like drunk beyond belief, and then there's always that one guy. He's like, dude, you don't get it. It's about the walls we build.
Don't bring me
inside
back
ourselves.
to 2016. Are we seriously talking about Trump again right now? When that happened, I couldn't stop listening to The Wall. I was like, oh man, Pink Floyding it hard right now. Because like all the people are going to start wearing black trench coats with those little symbols. That movie's about our lives.
So yeah, let me formally apologize for offending everyone, especially Blake. I know Blake is offended.
You, Tim?
My
You're
only
just such
thought
a toxic
is
masculine energy. You're just
I know.
constantly...
I just don't want anyone. This goes back to the whole discrimination thing. I would love to be in a world where we could accept each other's beliefs.
Tim, you just need a spiritual experience, because once you have one, you won't question a lot of what you won't challenge or question a lot of what you are and what
I
you
have
do.
had spiritual experiences. I've had really deep ones.
So what does that lead you thinking about the connection between all things? Do you believe in something like that?
Yeah, but I don't think it's something that can be put into words. It's not a words thing.
God's a silly word. I give you that. God's dog backwards, and it means like holy Odin or damned Odin, right? It's not a great term. It's like a lowercase dinger deity, but like, what about, let's get metaphysical. Like, what do you think is, what's your thing?
I would say, and the struggle that I have is probably the same struggle that most people have. So I was raised Christian, and I like to pretend like I'm an atheist. I think we all do, right? And then when you have a hard time, there you are on your knees praying, and I've actually thought that to myself. There have been times like I'm a recovering alcoholic, and so there were times when I was like, please, and then I was like, who the fuck am I praying to? But right,
it's funny.
It's and that goes to get them while they're young, because but so I've had those moments, but
so you
then
don't think you're praying to somebody? You don't think it's a higher power? Like, you don't think you're being called to like the obvious?
I do,
thing?
but then there's logic versus faith, right? And like I can't resolve that, and I think most people probably can't. I think most people have this inner conflict.
What is your logic that's conflicting with this idea of there being like a guiding?
So there's that, and then I've also had deep spiritual experiences, and that goes beyond words, right? for me, it goes beyond words. I mean, for you, that may interpret into words and symbols. You know, for Julia, you said you'd had answers. Were those answers concrete word type answers, or was it more like knowing?
Are you talking? Well, we're talking. What I brought up earlier was about with proving it is I was blind to certain targets that I had written down that verified what the target was, and because you asked about proving it, but are we talking about now? What are you asking about? Like God, or what's the
Well,
answer?
Yes.
I was, I mean, yeah, I was just basically asking, like, were those experiences that you had, was it was it something that kind of came into words? Was it like a textbook, or was it more
Mm.
like knowing? You know what I mean? Because
Oh, it's all of it. It's like it's a feeling that encompasses you that you feel everywhere. It almost reminds me of like the way people describe like near death experiences, where you're overcome with like you're in such awe and there's such glory and you feel it and you feel tingly and happy. You feel love like embracing you, and it it's like, and then you just it when you're there, when you're experiencing it and you're feeling it and everything kind of makes sense. And it's so interesting. I think it's the Book of the Dead that
yeah,
they talk about like when you go there, like when you go to certain states of consciousness or whatever, this place, like you cannot take back what you learn. Like you just seem to know all these things, but you don't necessarily take all of it back. But it is such an amazing energy
It
that
to me seems like the experience a machine would have if it was like a CD player, and you put a disc in it and you took it out, or if you were connected all of a sudden as a phone to the internet and
Uh,
then you were
when you
disconnected.
disconnect your hard drive, your like
Yeah, it doesn't know
external
the
hard
things, but
drive to your
remembers
laptop.
vaguely that it had this experience, but doesn't have that data anymore to recall. So it might have some meta tags, but it might not have stored any meta tags.
yeah,
But that kind of calls that idea that there's this sort of energy that material matter is made of. That energy is forming and sitting in positions, but it's quantum entangled. So the likelihood that we're able to interact or that we're connected. I mean, we're already dealing with if machines are able to pick up radio waves, and clearly we're using radio waves and birds are using them, then we're probably getting a lot more out of radio than we realize. Also, do you know about Michael Persinger's God helmet, the Koran helmet, right? So this was a thing that was designed for the
that's a football
purpose.
helmet.
Well, the Koran helmet is a
Oh,
machine that
give me a
can make
sec. I'll
you
be right back.
experience. It makes you experience God, right? So that's not.
mm,
It makes you think you're experiencing God, and that's you're able to produce the psychosomatic responses. And Persinger's not a religious person; he's an atheist, but he found it didn't matter that he called it the Koran helmet. People kept saying that they were experiencing God, so it didn't really, objectively, that's the experience they were having, right?
wait,
And
so they does it in radio waves? Like what?
yeah, so it's essentially how's this work again? Uses solenoids placed over the temporal lobe, produces EEG traces from the limbic system, and then EMF emissions, radiation. And also you're in a
Whoa.
Faraday chamber, right? So you can control the experiences. So all of a sudden, the Schumann resonance is no longer, or whatever it is no longer affecting your mind because you're in a Faraday cage, and they can produce a new sonic frequency, and that change, and especially because it's directly in your mind, it can interact and it can you can change the signals going into one part of your mind depending on what another signal is going on, and you can change your equilibrium and everything else like that. So this can make you essentially have the same experience as if you were having a divine or godlike experience, right? And that's kind of, it calls into question, like, we have these receptors for that purpose, or is it just like, okay, well, all those experiences, they can happen, so because they can happen, we're having them. Like, it's not really clear, but it seems like the idea that we can have them is more interesting than not, because the sophistication of those mechanisms are not just accidental. It's not like, oh wow, you're just not able to deal with this data stream and this is what you're thinking. These are
I think that's
specific
what a lot of
receptors.
these temples and a lot of these sites were made for. And we look at it now and we're like, what were they made for? And it was, I think, to induce to have that happen where they were in these rooms and the rooms are cut in a certain way for specific frequencies and you combine that with maybe light and sound, and it'll get you there probably,
Right.
to certain states. It reminds me of Lady de Elche too. The two that she had, the two circular things on each side of her head,
But yeah,
like
not sure
that.
if you got all
I
that,
see
Tim.
Blake in chat. Blake, let me apologize to Blake. Blake, I did not mean to offend you, or I'm actually looking out for Blake, and the reason why is no one should be able to say what Blake believes is correct or incorrect. That is personal article of faith for him, right? And that's my belief. I believe that, and the same thing would go to everyone here. Like, it is not my place to judge what you
Yeah, but I
believe.
think that's the problem. Is like, so again, we're getting back to that idea of like religion being just this
Until
sort of
we bring forth God technology, let's be God
this is plebeian.
technology.
Tim's talking about,
I
but
want the singularity.
Tim, you're talking about the plebeian religion of peasants. And again, it's like this is different. Those are reductionist ideas. What people believe has to matter when it starts to be about math and science and the reality of the universe. Those are no longer. That's why the question becomes less important. Is it someone's right to believe crazy things, and why people start to freak out about flat Earth and science, about the space and everything, because like, well, these are drastically different approaches to our future and our strategy for our future. So I think it's going to be difficult to just say, okay, well, everyone can believe whatever they want to believe forever. We've been trying that with postmodernism, and so far what you have is you have people that say, okay, well, my experiences are real, so I'm going to become a cat.
Well, and like, so John Michael Greer he's a Druid, right? And he practices the traditional European tradition. And again, it's like, you know what? My approach is like, hey, more power to you, man.
I feel like the only one who would know if he really was doing traditional druidic practices would be like the Vatican archive librarian.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I wish I had I don't have any answers in terms of faith. I don't have any answers. But the big thing for me is just like the
Well,
thing that
shouldn't
scares
faith?
me is in history when you have a group of people who say this is right, that's when you end up. I mean, like the communists did that, right? Joseph Stalin said atheism is the path. There is no God at all. And if you don't believe it, you're dead, right? And see, you've got, you know, so
Yeah,
that's the problem that
extremism
I see.
bad.
Russian cosmism emerged out of that. There was still sort of, I think, a spiritualism from Russian cosmism. I don't think that the death of the idea of the single parent who writes books, like, I think that's the thing. Nietzsche didn't mean that Narayana was dead. Nietzsche didn't mean the Tetragrammaton or math was a lie. Nietzsche meant that our ideas about God being a person like us needed to be re-examined, because it's not that God is in the image of us, it's that we're in the image of God. It's that everything, the metacosm, the Vitruvian man, this whole thing, at all moments in time. And think about yourself, right? Like, as a child, as yourself now, as you will be in the future as an old person, all the emotions that you can experience. I mean, this is the complication of like, who are you, and what are
Yeah.
you, right? Like, it changes, but it also is a singularity. So I think we should be trying to find the truth. That's the better goal of religion to me. I get why it's not the most practical goal of religion and why it's more useful what you're saying. Like, plebeian religion is the Baptists build a community center and they support the poor, and then children have a place to go after school, and it doesn't matter what they believe. I agree with you. I think at that point the Church of Satan doing after school daycares is probably sufficient. But if you're looking for the truth should be.
I'm looking at Bernie. Bernie's trying not to smile.
Everyone sign up for the X Church.
I'm just thinking about
Please do.
Bernie's visualizing the Church of Satan doing daycare.
They
Okay.
do a lot of good beach cleanups, man, and anti-bullying. I mean, it is what it is. But the idea that religion has to be helpful supplemented the idea that it didn't have to be accurate or truthful. And this is a post-Galilean issue. This idea that, well, we're gonna just stop. We're gonna stop using church as science. We're gonna believe one thing, and science will be another thing. That's crazy. That's never been. That's
One of
a
the
new
one of the
idea.
challenges, one of my complaints actually comes out of. I'm going to piss everybody off, but it comes out of your traditional Christian literalism. And this goes back to my mom, right? So I'm going to blame her. But even when I was a kid, because she bounced around all these different Christian churches, and my mother, at least, is very much a heretic, right? But
Nice.
the idea is that the Bible, I'm just going to pick on the Bible for a minute, right? The traditional, King James version, it's a collection of philosophy and wisdom and knowledge, right? And as you've mentioned, there's some esoteric knowledge
Maybe
that's
some
in it.
John D code. Yeah,
There's a
right.
lot, right? But then the other problem is it is also a collection of social traditions and social customs, right? And so you got stuff like don't mix, like my mom does pottery, and one of the things that she always mentioned was don't mix milk and meat in the same bowl. Well, the reason was the bowls, the pottery and the wood, right, that they used at that time, those bowls were porous. So the milk would get into the pores and it would go bad. And when you put meat in it, it would make the meat bad. So it had nothing to do with God. It was a social tradition for like, hey,
Right.
don't do this. It's really important. We're going to add this to our custom. And so the challenge that I see is like modern mainstream Christianity. You've got this book that says this is right and this is truth, but the problem is they're not even really looking at where that book came from. And then you get into other stuff like the Council of Nicaea, right, where they've got like this massive collection of like testimonies from people who were like, this was Jesus, and the council sits down and they're like, no, we're going to throw these out and we'll take these. I'm like, well, wait a minute, you know so again, I'm picking on Christianity, but like a lot of religions have this aspect to them, and that's why I'm very much pro faith, but I'm really not pro religion, because religion it's kind of a form of control. It's like we're going to line people up and they're all going to march in the same direction, you
Well,
know?
I feel like the Bible is an interesting issue because it should be considered a collage, not a book.
Yeah.
It's got a bunch of kind of pseudo books in it, but of course those books have all been changed. A lot of them have been changed before they were translated. And you can look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Qumran document and say, okay, well, every time Jesus is speaking in the New Testament, it's coming from another book. They're directly quoting it. They just take that and then they write it down into their larger story. And this is all before Marcionites or Ebionites are arguing about Christ. But that's there's two things here. One is that the Bible is interesting because of that, because now what you have is other Bibles, other books like the Gita and the Quran. They'll tell you about how perfect a person was and how everything worked out, essentially. And the Bible is a collection of human failures and the consequences of their sins, like where the God, or when we say God, you have to also think of like the literal legal term, acts of God. People there for generations are suffering because of the choices they've made, and we're documenting it. And it's not always saying you should live like this. Like you look at Deuteronomy and Leviticus where it says if someone rapes someone, you should give them 2 chickens or some shekels. It's not saying to live like that. It's saying people lived like this. It's an anthropological record. And
Yeah.
be careful because this could happen. This is the worst thing that ever happened. And it's led up to a jubilee, which is this guy shows up and says, hey, look, we really got to stop rocking the boat with this karma. And we should start to just forgive each other's debts and sins and transgressions so that we can just forgive and forget. Literally is probably the best thing. And they killed him for it, and all the witnesses. And then you have this idea that but you have already a Jewish and Vedic, really there's this ancient antediluvian idea of sacrifices and atonement. Like if you steal a candy bar, you have to pay for the candy bar, right? Like so the atonement sacrifice reemerges, that Christ was brutally murdered, and it's a God, so it's the shepherd that sacrificed, not the lamb. So you have this immortal sacrifice. This is a conflicting religion, and I would argue that this is not anything to do with what Christ was doing with his life, right? The living Christ message is very different. We can, in our lifetime, without killing goats, just forgive each other. To hooray, we can all kill each other now because it doesn't matter because God died.
And so what you're going back to, you were talking about the Kabbalah, right? And I think this goes to what Blake was talking about as well. You guys are going back to older books, and part of it is trying to work around some of the crap that was added in, right?
Yeah, but also I think it's worth looking at those books. Like you don't throw them away because you look at fake history to find out the truth. You have to look also at anthropology. You have to look at what people believed at the time. The Bible wasn't meant to be a single collection of books. Pope Gregory he's like, look, these are the ones I like. You know, like you might have different ones, and there are a bunch of different options. The real reason we have a canon is because of Marcion, because Marcion said we should just throw out all the old books. He is a very weird kind of Christian. He thought that there were two gods, right? Because the Bible does say this, that there are multiple gods. And it says that there was an angry God that created the world. It was an angry, wrathful God. And then there's this loving God, which is where Jesus is coming from. And that was the Marcion Christians. And they banned the Old Testament. They're like, well, these guys clearly didn't understand what was going on, so we're going to just cut that out. We'll just have anything from Paul on. And that freaked a lot of people out, but the Marcions were really popular. So they eventually, St. Augustine was like, well, we should probably make sure to have a canon that includes these older books. Started with 77, works down to 66, but the Catholics still have extra books. But that doesn't even include the Ethiopian church, which has its own set of books. I think the Orthodox might even have a few more books as well. But the Ethiopians have their own gospels, like including Gnostic texts like the Pistis Sophia. So there's a lot more to Christianity, and it's kind of weird that we think of it as, oh, Christianity, it's Baptists, or it's like fundamentalist Christians, or oh, it's it's Mormons, or oh, it's the Protestants. It's a lot of different things. It's also like Syrians, it's also Palestinians.
No,
And they have
Andreas,
different beliefs.
let me thank you for sharing that. And I mean that you know far more about this than I do. You know
Well,
far more
I
about
don't know.
Christianity than I do.
Some of the Christianities around the world, though, conflict with what we like. In America, we look at Christianity a very specific way because of what it's done for us.
Yeah, well, so
Or
then
to
my
us.
question would be, based on these other books that you know of, like how does that change? I
So
mean, this
first
would
off,
be
first
like,
off, it doesn't need to be about the books. That's the biggest thing. The idea that we need to have canon is wrong, and it comes from Marcion. Marcion did that, and they're like, well, no. Don't throw away the books. Let's keep at least these. But that's kind of like the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights wasn't meant to be, it was supposed to be expanded infinitely. And so we should be continually adding, I mean, not just like Book of Mormon level, we should be having the stories of the church in the the third and fourth century letters and committees. Those things should be included in the church. We should also have the Didache. The Didache shows the first century or 2 centuries of Christianity and what they did. And they're like, okay, look, if a guy comes to town and he says he's an evangelist, Messiah following Christian, let him stay 3 days. If he tries to stay longer than that, kick him out of town. Like, they have all these weird, interesting rules. If he asks for money, don't give him to him. He's not a good Christian. Like, interesting stuff that could be in the Bible that shows how people lived at the time, and then you'd be looking at it differently, because now you're like, okay, well, this is a story of people trying to better themselves
Yeah.
throughout history. It's
Yeah.
not the same. It's not all of a sudden, well, this is like the way
yeah,
to
it's
be.
it's an oral history. It's an oral
Yeah.
history, and you see that like with, I mean, every group of people, right? That's what we do. Like we are storytellers as human beings, and so I mean, that's the tool they had, and from what I understand, as an oral history, one of the things they would do is memorize this with incredible accuracy, right? That's supposed to be one of the hallmarks of the Jewish tradition, was the level of accuracy that these stories were handed down with. And that's why, like, from what I understand, when you go back and you look at these from time to time when they are written down, they're always like remarkable at how accurate these stories are over time.
Well, so that's the other thing, is like there are scribes that copy stories, but there are very different stories for different groups. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John weren't Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, nor were they even the schools of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. But there are ones we know, like Thomas went to India, and we do have in India a huge Christian belief system that is essentially, they believe that Noah's son Shem went to India, and that essentially like the Vaishnavist cults, their beliefs are like Persian post-flood traditions of great men who did live like perfect, in a lot of ways, and so they were remembered and honored, but that it took away from the original idea of source, and so that Narayana is Yahweh essentially. And so this is, I mean, there are a lot of diversion. And then there's Manichaeism. Like St. Augustine was trying to be a Manichaean at first, because there's like Buddhist Christianity, like all from Persia to China, and they believed that there were 7 dark archons and 7 light archons that like the dark archons were tricked into swallowing the light archons, but then the light archons were inside the dark archons, so now they can come out from the inside and they'll integrate, and our job is to better ourselves, so there's all these different belief systems that were emerging. The most interesting thing to me, though, is they're always associated with universities, they're always associated with education, they're always associated with the betterment of science, of astronomy, algebra for predicting flood seasons, and you'll never find a better example than a monk or a priest or a imam for like a scientist or an alchemist or an inventor or a lawyer, like Maimonides, right? And this is the other thing, is like the way things were in Spain, right? Where Maimonides was a Jewish rabbi, but he was a doctor, and so he was and he made an administrator over Christians in a Muslim state. It's just amazing. I think this is it's hard to understand because we think of these divisive American, ideas that these groups are so separated, which I think they were a lot less.
No, and so what interests me is what you're describing is I've read about something called a racial climb, and this is also a cultural thing, right? But this goes to the whole, again, as Americans, we like to divide things up. This is a black person, this is a white person, this is an Asian person. But in reality, what you have is you have these series of tribes, and they all met and interacted. And as you're describing, they traded not just goods, but also ideas with each other. And so when you go to the Middle East, right, and you look at, okay, where does a white Northern European person begin, and where does a Middle Eastern person begin? There is no beginning or ending. You have people who are a little bit darker and a little bit closer in culture all the way down, right? Because these were trade routes. And so what you're describing is the same thing in terms of storytelling and religion. Like you were talking about Thomas going to India and picking up things there. And for me, that's incredibly intriguing because then you see this cross-pollination that's happening with ideas.
Yeah. And again, with education, because why would you care to better yourself or to make the world a better place necessarily? Instead, I mean, because honestly, there's examples of people who didn't. You can look in France when they, in the post Saint Just period, started to have, even up into Schopenhauer, nihilism, and existentialism, libertine period in England, right? Like you have syphilis and fires emerging out of like the craziest of circumstances because everyone wants to experience Sodom and Gomorrah, right? But then there's a extreme lack of betterment which emerges from that because there's no point, there's no goal. That's where I think that's what faith is really for. I think faith is supposed to be about that, not necessarily. I can't even really conceive of the kind of idea of faith that I think you're talking about, which I agree. Like, there's like this weird idea that I've seen it though. Like, I've seen movies about like Christian Bible camp things. I know that kind of Christian exists, Paris syndrome, but I can't even really understand how that works or what it's for exactly, except that it's, a safeguard against questioning things. I get that.
Yeah.
I think that's I think if
Yeah.
that's, and then we can agree, like but that's not what I think faith is. It's not, I don't think God is a single parent who writes books. I don't think faith is a license to not question, to be
I would
arrogant.
say in the United States, we are very good at mass producing things, and religion is one of the things that we mass produce, right? And it's like everybody marches to the same drummer down the same road, and and nobody questions it, right? And they all watch the same Jesus movie, and they all feel good about things. And the problem is, I mean, it's a shortcut to thinking, like so many things, right? And it brings us back to politics. It's a structure of belief, and it's like, oh, we've done all the thinking
Used to
for you.
divide and conquer under the name of spirit and soul, and
Yeah.
that we need to get back to our own understanding, our own spirits and souls, and making peace with it, and through that finding out what our own interpretations of creation and our creator are.
Well, I do think it's an interesting thing about what Blake was getting at, because this idea that if we're able to emerge as a conscious being, regardless, the fact that we have a superorganism that has political bodies and like our organs are connected to our brain, all of it, if that can happen and consciousness can take over this kind of a vehicle, then it seems macrocosmically logical that that could happen on a larger scale. That there could be some sort of consciousness that is using the sensorial information made from
Yeah.
chemical explosions in
Yeah.
stars. Right. There could be more consciousness out there, and for that to be more sophisticated or even stacked in complexity based on the same systems that we have, either direction is interesting. It could mean that we could get someone could pick up the phone. We could get a call from the other side of the line, and that could be something more than just an extraterrestrial. Except I'm starting to like that term because it sounds so much more like what they mean when they mean God. They might be maybe extraterrestrial is just the term for the thing that is broader than the terrestrial, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh?
And that's
Yeah,
kind of where
no.
I'm at. I like to think that there's something larger than us. And I think all of us can agree on that, right? I think everyone agrees on that, and this goes back to what Julie was talking about. Like we have all of us have had experiences, right? And I know in my case, I would say the deepest spiritual experiences I've had cannot be put into words. At least I'm not able to. I'm not able to put them in words. And like you said, it's like you take the CD out, or like
Oh, I like
like
that.
or like like I hate to use this example, but it's like you get stoned, right? And you have something happen when you're stoned. You can't relive that unless you're stoned. You can't go back to it. It's like it happened, it was real, it meant something, it was really deep. I kind of get it, but I can't go back to it because I'm not there right now.
Do you know the Boltzmann brain hypothesis? Can you pull this up, Bernie, for a second? The Boltzmann brain thought experiment suggested by Ludwig Boltzmann. And by the way, look at this beautiful man.
Mhm.
But Boltzmann said, as an Austrian physicist,
They all
this
looked
idea.
angry back then.
I think it's a lot of coffee. You have to understand. It's the Turkish coffee from Vienna. It's changing them. That he said that would it be possible that it might be likely possible for a single brain to spontaneously form in a void, complete with memory of having existed in our universe, rather than for the entire universe to come out in the manner cosmologists think it did. But sort of this interesting concept that if we're talking about quantum physics and entanglement, that anything can happen and that everything's emerging, then is it fair? Are we trying to say that in a complete vacuumous void, do you believe it's possible? Like, I mean, not saying probable, not saying that, but possible at all for a full brain to emerge, right? And with all of the memories that having existed in the
Well,
universe,
actually,
just possible.
what you were saying a minute ago, actually, and I don't have knowledge on this, but I mean, I did some interviews on the Global Consciousness Project. You know about that, right, Andreas? And this goes to what you were saying. And then I did one on actually exactly what you were saying about superorganisms. And so maybe this goes to what Blake is describing as well. But um, it is incredibly intriguing when you think about it. I mean, our body is just a collection of cells, and so we have this experience, right? All of these experiences that we have, including the spiritual ones, you know, it's there's something there that's greater than the sum of the parts, and this Gaia hypothesis, right, or Agora, which is what the author was calling it, is that as human beings, especially using the internet, we are greater than the sum of our parts, but we don't necessarily see it the same way our cells don't see it, right? Like our cells don't necessarily know that they're cells, at least all the time. They're just kind of doing their thing, being a cell, but they're part of something larger. And so the hypothesis was maybe we're the same way. Like maybe all of us are part of some larger consciousness, but and maybe this includes like
And maybe
singularity.
cells have a bit more awareness than we realize.
Yeah,
They could be
yeah.
living their own lives in a sense. It might not be the same, but in terms of stacked complexity, it might have the feel, you know?
And then the other thing that he was getting into was these superorganisms can be, again, like you were saying, stacked complexity. You can have superorganisms within superorganisms,
Totally.
and then another part that he didn't, and this again, this was my brain spinning. Another part that he didn't get into was, okay, is the internet a nervous system for this? Because it's so new. Because he was only thinking, like he was thinking of beehives and stuff like that, right? So he's like, okay, you see how bees use chemicals, and chemicals are like hormones for the superorganism, and all that kind of stuff. Um, my thought went to, okay, so now we use the internet to speed up this communication. Maybe if we are a superorganism, maybe it's just gotten smarter. Whatever we're part of. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I like
You know
that
about
thought actually.
carcinogen? You know about
Reaching, it's
crabification, carcinization. I'm trying so hard here. You know, when things become crabs, like everything evolves into crabs. You know what I'm
No.
talking about? So hold on, let me pull this up real
we're
quick.
not monkeys, we're crabs.
Well,
Bernie is a
I think
cancer.
he's saying
Yes.
we're going to become crabs in the future.
We're getting there. Everything,
Crab
I'm
crustaceans.
trying so hard, man. The internet just hates me. Okay, so basically it was like the crabification article. It was like, why do things keep becoming crabs? Thousands of things evolve into crabs. These are all things that started as different, and then they just evolved to look like crabs because it's just a really practical thing to have a shell on your outside and have these big pinchy pointers and things like that. And you can also think about the hermit crab, which is a transhumanist kind of thing. I mean,
Crabs
trans crab.
kind of scare me. when you think about it.
Transcrabist.
Yeah, when you look
Transcarcinate.
close at them, aren't they scary? Maybe
Aren't
it's
we
just
all?
me.
I think we all are. But what's interesting to me about the crab is it has a shell that it's collected from nature. This is This is technology. This is essentially a cybernetic, or a what do you call that? Where like where it's it's an implant, or it's this. That's crazy to me. 3D printed hermit crab homes. They've made they made glass shells, and then the crabs adopted them, so you can literally get them to think, all right, I'll use that as my shell now. So I've been thinking a lot about that because humans, we're evolving into a superorganism in the same sense that we've got
Yeah.
a shell, like a wall around our society. We have, a backup system for memories that is, so our superorganism, even if people die, the superorganism of humanity is immortal. And it's not that humans are becoming, it's not that a person is becoming a crab. It's that humanity itself is becoming a giant crab. And this is, I think, what we'll see as superorganisms emerge. Things like that. I mean, not necessarily like a comic book, more the idea that we're going to have these cybernetic pseudo-biological superorganisms that are made up of, like a siphonophoric jellyfish made up of many people, many things, and also have technology to supplement this greater conscious experience. So we're going to see, something that is a lot like a god, at least what we've defined as a person who is immortal and omnipotent and omni-aware, and all these traits that we've defined for heaven and God and things like that. Those are just little, what's that called, where you're like running in like a track and you have to jump over a hurdle? Those are little hurdles. Heaven and God are just hurdles on the way to a bigger thing. I think that's another reason why faith is interesting, because we're looking at sophistication to the level of what is the universe made of. I mean, in the Kardashev scale, are we looking at a universe that is able to self-replicate, right? Because we have stardust that's able to, stars are able to produce, theoretically, stars are able to produce atomic clouds of stardust that produce electron chemical adjutants that produce symmetry of different kinds of periodic table events, which allow for, I mean, that is very similar to me, the idea of gestation and pregnancy and everything else. These are cataclysmic events that are creating worlds. So I don't know. It's hard for me to say that we shouldn't be looking towards consciousness as a entity beyond humanity. Like superorganisms definitely have precedent. At least we're
The
inventing
fact
one.
that we haven't is what's missing.
Yeah,
But
well,
we
and
haven't
again,
talked-
one of my Air Force buddies was telling me, I mean, I was never in the Air Force, but it's one of my buddies who was in the Air Force.
You should have left that.
He,
I would have loved to just believe that you were a fighter pilot, because you
no,
kind of have a Top Gun kind of thing.
I don't have those kind of reflexes, man. I trust me. Yeah, I'd be the one I'd be Goose. I guess that was the Navy, but same principle. Um, so he read a book about plasma filaments, and again, I think this may go to what Blake is saying, but he read a book about plasma filaments, and it was the same idea you're discussing. It's could these filaments be part of a larger consciousness in the stars or between the stars, right? And he
Yes.
was talking about the way that plasmas behave, and it's almost intelligent in nature. And starting with that as a basis, could you have logic and mind form? And then you've got like Roger Penrose, I believe, and other folks, and that I think their idea is that consciousness never goes to zero, which I thought was also interesting. I think that's Penrose. I think it's Hameroff and Penrose, right? It's so in that model, the human mind has the majority of consciousness, but your arm has a little bit, and your fingertip has a little bit, and and your computer mouse has maybe a tiny bit, and then space itself has just a tiny, tiny, tiny amount, right? So, I mean, I don't know, different ideas, but it all goes to what you're saying, is that there's something larger that we're part of, right?
That's what it comes down to. I'm sorry, guys and girls. We are almost 4 hours
4 hours is
in
pretty
now.
based. I'm pretty proud
Well,
of it.
again,
Yeah.
let me apologize for offending everyone. Tonight's my night to offend.
Oh,
So,
all good. No worries. Discussions, and
Blake, if
we
you're
put
listening, I give you props. I give you props.
the fact that it
Blake,
didn't
we love you.
murder and like killing one another because we discussed politics and geopolitics and then religions and theosophy for 4 hours and still all here smiling like that's a miracle.
Here's
right?
my
Like,
picture of a superorganism, like the Earth evolving into a crab. Check it out. Very sweet.
Crab world
Crab world.
Crab World. There you
That's
go.
what's gonna happen.
from
Just crawl around with a big Earth as its shell. That's coming.
Is
Plus,
just
it
me or-
shows you the environment we live in. Like, you're gonna need big claws and a shell to isolate.
No, the whole world will be this. The
It
whole
looks
world will
like
be
a
one
giant
crab.
face hugger, doesn't it? I'm the only person who makes that association. They're like giant face huggers.
Dude, I don't know.
It's
There's some
creepy.
Starship
You're never
Troopers
gonna
sinks
see
going
a
on here, that's
crab
for sure.
the same way again.
Dude.
Ugh.
Oh,
It is
crabs.
good.
Crabs,
is.
man.
Is that an Aztec crab?
That's a cool crab. That's a scorpion crab by the
Yeah,
looks
and there's
of
like
it.
a temple. I like this one better because it's like kind of like a Buddhist mecha crab.
I'd worship
Really?
that crab deity.
Yeah, but this is
Well, I
more
don't think you'd have a
realistic.
choice. He looks pretty
Cancer.
pissed. You worship him or else,
Dude,
right?
he's swole. He's very swole. Super crab. Oh,
Right,
it's like
like-
super crab. See, because he's got like a little chest plate. That's clever.
Chad
Something
crab.
We're all worshiping the crab. And on that note, thank you all.
Ciao.